people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kori Propst, Vice President and Wellness Director of the Diet Doc, here with Dr. Joe Klemczewski. Thanks for joining us again for the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. Hey Joe, so you were recently interviewed by P4P Muscle Radio, and that's with Desiree and Kaylin. And you discussed intermittent fasting with them and sort of, you know, the concept of time restricted eating. I think, I would certainly love to hear what you covered during that interview. I think our audience would be interested in understanding more what that even is. Maybe you could define it for us, and then perhaps we could get into some application.
Gotcha. Good. Yeah, I agree. Probably really fantastic idea to hit some of the high points. Kaylin and Desiree have a great podcast, and they interview a lot of people, and we had a whole hour to cover it there. So this will be some of those key points, but to just define it, I think it does mean something different to a lot of people. I subscribe to the most common definition, which means that intermittent fasting is something like eating just 1 or 2 meals a day. Okay. So it does mean for other people just, skipping a meal or moving a meal out of one of the ends of your day, but that's more of a time restricted eating protocol that's become popular. But I do think for some people in the health culture, especially in the complementary medicine arena, intermittent fasting can mean actual fasting, like taking a day a week and just every Monday not eating for 24 hours. And some people still do that. I took a medical fasting class in graduate school, and I did that for a whole semester. Every Monday I didn't eat, and that was part of the class. I ended up even doing, kind of for extra credit, a 5-day water fast. So Monday through Friday, it wasn't juice, it wasn't detox stuff where you're still getting some calories and all that. It was just nothing for 5 days. So that can be intermittent fasting for some people. But in our fitness arena, I think for most people, it means just eating a couple times a day. And I've seen that coupled with a ketogenic lifestyle. So for example, I've had a couple clients come to me and they're doing just that. They're eating 2 meals a day, 0 carbs, just all of their protein and fat in those 2 meals. So have you heard anything different? Are there different genre types?
No, I think that goes along with what I've had clients come to me already engaged in. I'm interested, could you define, because fasting means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and just in terms of like digestion and time, postprandial time, what is fasting in general, and when does it actually start after you have a meal?
Wow. Okay. So that's a whole nother topic that I think would take longer, but it's great. We didn't get into this in the other interview. A lot of things happen when you start fasting in terms of you just get a little ways through toward that next meal, and the different hormones like leptin start kicking in, and you're going through hunger changes and just signaling to your brain that the digestive system is empty. But then you can get into all kinds of different phases. There are different named stages of fasting. Okay. The last one, of course, is starvation, which accelerates you toward death. If you've ever had somebody that you've seen in end of life situations like cancer or just natural, causes of death and end of life expectancy, they just go very quickly in those last 30 days. And that's that final stage. So anyway, without getting too technical with all of that, I think for most people, it's a process of just structuring your meal. So instead of intuitively eating when you're hungry or eating every 2 or 3 hours because you're afraid of catabolism, you just say, look, I'm going to eat every 12 hours, or I'm going to span it in a way that is within an 8-hour window. That's what time restricted eating is right now to most people. But to your point, the part of the good process is you have a chance to use not only all of the food in your GI system, meaning stomach and small intestine, everything where you have digestive and absorption capacity, and then even some of the digestive products in your bloodstream. So, lipid levels, amino acid levels, of course, glucose elevates in your bloodstream after you eat. And to get to a place where your GI system is virtually empty in that absorption time frame, and your blood lipid profile, everything else has completely stabilized to the point you're having to recruit new energy substrates, that's when in this theory, that you're ready to eat again. There's nothing left except pulling in other things from your stored sources of your body.
And so, okay, if someone, say, is setting a certain time frame, that's very different than, quote unquote, knowing that there's nothing left and that it's time to eat, right? Because, what are the symptoms? Are there going to be symptoms that tell you it's time to eat when your digestive system is completely empty and your body's in that recruitment phase?
Yeah, this is one of the coolest principles that I think can be useful for anybody just to go through this process. I remember a client recently telling me that she actually tried a fast. I think she went 2 full days. And she said, the greatest thing I learned was it's okay to be a little bit hungry. And,
I don't have to eat every time I feel like it and my stomach is growling.
Yeah, I don't feel addicted to food. I feel more in control. So if you are scheduling your meals, you learn that, well, so what if I'm hungry? Even so what if I feel a little weak and depleted? I'll just sit down for a few minutes and drink some water and it'll go away, because then my body is catching up. Now I'm going to have the benefit of using hormones like glucagon to retrieve energy out of fat cells, and life goes on. So that's one of the greatest principles, I think, of trying something like that. And there are pros, but there are also context-based cons, depending on if you have performance goals or body composition, physique enhancing goals, that sort of thing.
So maybe we could we jump into that? I think I can understand. And are there any other pros to go over first before we jump into why would we maybe not want to do this, and in what situations it might be kind of something we'd want to steer away from?
So on your question about the pros, what could be beneficial, it is, as I said, just a way to calorie restrict in a way that you cognitively have convinced yourself is okay. So people who do something like this tend to be a little bit leaner. If you're scheduling your meals, I always bring up Jack LaLanne in a fasting conversation, because the last 10 or so years of his life, he ate 2 meals a day. And at 90 some years old, that was perfect for his activity level. And that's what he needed. So those were his contexts. And so that prevented him from just slogging through a bunch of food that he didn't necessarily need. So the benefits are clear. We also know in just a calorie restrictive environment, you're decreasing oxidation, so less free radical damage in your body, which is why most studies that have looked at calorie restriction, you show an increase of longevity. So some pretty heavy pros on just eating fewer meals per day. The one thing I will say is to drop all of the stupid meme type things centered around, well, that's how we're supposed to eat, or that's how caveman used to eat, and we would hunt for an entire month and finally get a buffalo. All that is just total bullshit. We scavenged and ate everything we could get our hands on because it took 10 to 12 hours a day of constant grazing just to survive.
Right.
So all of that stuff is not true. But in today's more Western culture environments where we have too much food, to actually have to plan that we're not going to eat everything we want whenever we want it can be a pretty healthy thing.
Yeah, and I see it being a positive thing for individuals who are just super busy too and want to have that large span of time where they're not I mean, they may be having thoughts about food. That's pretty normal for people, but to not have to stop and prepare a meal or go get one, and to know that a meal is coming and what that's going to look like. A question for you, though, that I think probably some of our listeners are asking themselves is, okay, so whether you're doing this and you're maintaining your weight, or you're doing this and you have a fat loss goal, it's still a caloric game. It's not like when you go to eat your first meal that it's just a free-for-all, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, it depends, again, on how you do this, because some people, I would hope somebody who's going to the extent of time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting has a pretty healthy base of food sources. I mean, hopefully that's in their conscience. But, some people don't, obviously, and it becomes a way to just promote binging. But I would say this. It also helps on the pro side to make people have a little bit higher calorie meals. We can get into the habit of feeling like we have to eat every 2 or 3 hours and that kind of thing. And then your meals become so small, especially if you're dieting, that you feel like you're starving immediately after you just ate a meal. So to get a little bit more density can be very helpful. But on the very first front of dieting, like right now, we are in the middle of this 50 days to your hottest summer challenge. And with our team, we have almost 70 clients that enrolled in this, and they're gung-ho. We've got 15 of our Diet Doc coaches doing this. And I said, what a great opportunity for myself to lose 10 pounds, get in better shape. So I'm tracking my food and I'm doing this. And the very first behavior I've caught myself paying attention to is that, okay, I've eaten a meal. I start getting a little hungry. Instead of just grabbing food or my next meal, what do? I look at the clock and I say, wow, it's only been 3 hours. Maybe I can go another hour. And so I'm instantly trying to conserve my meals, spread out that time between meals so that I don't run out of food by the end of the day in terms of what I want my calorie intake to be, but also to think, in between those meals is where we start using extra body fat. That's where we tap into those long-term stores of energy. And so that's another really good principle of intermittent fasting that I think has just come into our culture. Even though I'm not a fan necessarily of doing that as an entire model or method, it has some things to teach us.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Joe. And while I'm not engaged in a fat loss diet, I'm just maintaining my weight right now. I mean, that's a strategy that I use every day. And I recognize and feel after a meal, an hour. It's like clockwork, an hour after. And I think it's because I sense a blood sugar drop where I'm like, I have this need to go scavenge for food. I want a snack then. And so then to look at, and this is how I know it's an hour, because I'll look at the clock and I'm like, and I noticed this pattern. But to your point, looking at the clock then allows me to have the second thought, like, well, it's only been an hour. Even though I may feel like I want to eat right now, I still have energy to use. Okay, back to work. And, I'm shifting my attention back to something else. But yeah.
On a micro scale, we talked about this a week or two ago when we were discussing ketogenic dieting. When you become fat adaptive or ketogenic adapted, your body does become more efficient at using fat as energy. And I mentioned that a study showed up to 40%. So just doing what you're discussing, which is, hey, as soon as you get those first symptoms of your blood sugar dropping a little bit, or even volumetrically, baroreceptors in our GI system showing, hey, the stomach is empty, it's time to eat. Just by ignoring that, your body kicks in and starts using stored glycogen, stored triglycerides, and you become better at that, more efficient. And so those symptoms become less noticeable. And I think that's one of the key things when you look at studies between people who just don't struggle with obesity at all And those who do, they genetically may have, better hormonal bases with things like that, the ghrelin and leptin hormonal, modulation and all that. But we have the ability to adapt to a certain degree, even if that's not our genetic strength. And it takes that kind of discipline just to say, well, screw it. I'm just not going to eat. Of course I'm hungry, but I'm just not going to. And then you're going to find out your body gets better at doing that.
Well, so part of it is perception. How am I going to perceive what the symptoms even mean? I mean, we could get into a whole podcast just on that cognitively. What meaning am I putting into what the experience is? I don't want people who are listening to get the idea, like, and here we can get it into some cons. If you're struggling with disordered eating and binge eating, I would not say this is something that would be optimal for you to try to do. This is really important. So, yeah. What are the other? Sorry, go ahead.
Totally agree. And on the cons, if you are performance-based, like go back to my statement about becoming more efficient, up to 40% better at using fat for energy, that's because you're in survival mode. That's because that's all you're giving your body. So the fat intake that you're putting into your body and then stored body fat, that doesn't mean it's optimal. It just means that's how you survive. So when you look at optimization of performance and having an environment in your body for muscle growth, strength, performance, of course carbs are better. I mean, that goes back to our previous podcast where we talked about the energy systems. You've got this phosphagen energy system where we need ATP, which is driven by glucose. All of that makes us unbelievably strong and powerful and quick and agile and fast for those immediate performance needs. And this goes into play with intermittent fasting. If you haven't eaten for 12 hours or 18 hours because you're in the beginning part of your day where your time restricted, first meal isn't until noon and you're training at 9 a.m., you're just not going to be optimal. And that might be a concession you're willing to make. But if your goal is performance and it is, I'm working with an Olympic athlete right now who has trials this weekend. And guess what? We are not time restricted feeding and we are not intermittent fasting. He's eating 450 grams of carbs a day, 120 grams of fat a day, 200 and some grams of protein a day, because we need all of the energy sources available at the times when they're most applicable.
Yeah, I love this, Joe. I was talking with the guy I work with on my cycling, and he refers clients to me for nutrition. And he said, I have this couple I'm working with, and someone recommended that they eat like a 25, 25, 50 split. So 25% protein, 25% carbs, 50% fat. And he's like, I would like your take on that, but I mean, just from what I know, that's not optimal for them. They're gearing up and training to go overseas and ride like 80 miles a day. He said they came to me, we had this like mini clinic and at his house. And he said every time I would try to have them like pick up their speed quickly, like we were going to do a sprint, he's like, it was like they were slogging through quicksand. I'm like, there's a reason for that. Yeah, that sort of structure is not optimal for them.
And to me, I think that's kind of a misapplication of science, because you could say that for endurance, that kind of fat metabolism is good. Yes. But as you just described, when you need it, it's good if time doesn't matter. Correct. Like if you're going to just ride your bike 20 hours a day recreationally across the country, that's fine. But if you need performance, that is not the diet you want to be on.
Agreed. Yeah. So
for those of us, even just looking at having our best health, best physiques, best performance recreationally for our own training and all that, you just have to go back to saying, of course, we need to manage all of this. It's not like, yay, I'm all for carbs and fat sucks and vice versa. It's looking at the ways we need. And I do think this is where I go back to the pros and say, you know what, we've found that meal optimization doesn't have to mean eating every 2 or 3 hours. You can there's really little difference. I remember Dr. Bill Campbell, president of the ISSN, he said, look, we did a literature review of everything out there. We took the best, PhD minds in our organization. In between 2 meals a day and 7 meals a day, there's just very little difference.
Yeah.
I mean, you get to that center of about 4 meals a day, 4 to 5, and that's optimal for fat loss, for performance, for everything. But you get out to those edges, and that's where you start to see the difference. So, again, I mean, the case is made scientifically. I think those of us who can just decide what works best for us individually are ultimately going to have our own answers.
Yeah. Okay. So say that someone listening wants to try intermittent fasting. What would be the first couple steps you would recommend that they take?
Okay. So I'm going to divide this into those 2 camps as a good way to wrap this up. If you just want to see if you can crush a fast and break those feelings and addictions and even physiological cues that keep you so tied to food, do a 1 day a week fast. I used to do this when I had this 24-hour fast for a semester in school. I wouldn't eat until dinner, so that my 24 hours was dinner one night, and then I didn't eat all the next day until dinner the next night. That way, even though it's a 24-hour fast, you still had food in that one day you could look forward to. And it's I think it's a powerful lesson to learn that, again, food doesn't have to control us. We can control it. So that's one thing to do.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say, one of the things I like to tell my clients is to remember it's not the Last Supper. So, when you're done with a meal, be done with it. And maybe you have one planned 2 or 3 hours later, but what if you're not hungry? Or what if you're really hungry? But to know that I will say, for the majority of us who are not living in a, food scarcity sort of situation, there will be food. And so to relieve that sense of urgency, that we must eat now because we're going to die and we're starving. So.
Yeah, and on the other camp, somebody who's just more interested in better eating, not necessarily learning how fasting can be helpful, I would say, if you're eating 6 meals a day, try to cut it down to 5, so you're forced to make one meal a little bit larger, spend a little more time between meals. If you're eating 5 meals, go down to 4, something like that. But on a time-restricted scale, instead of saying, well, I'm going to get all of my food in 8 hours, just chop off one meal. And I would say specifically, even though there's some conflicting studies on the morning stuff, I would say try it at night, because that's where it's going to be most beneficial. A lot of people who have started delaying eating in the morning, I'm a fan of saying, I may not eat right away. I may wait an hour, wait 2 hours, but to say I'm going to wait until noon, I think you start to limit the advantages that a breakfast gives you in terms of having protein. Plenty of studies show how that stimulates your metabolism, how it decreases hunger. So I would definitely not eat too late in the day, but you can definitely squeeze those edges inward a little bit and do your own version of time-restricted eating.
Great. Okay. Well, this was super helpful, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any final comments?
No, I think that's a great highlight. Again, if you guys want a full type of information dump on this, if you go to Desiree and Kaylin's podcast, P4P Muscle, Blogspot Radio, we did a whole 70 minutes on this, so there's definitely some more content there.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, thanks again for joining us for the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. See you soon.